Sirens wailed across the darkened streets of Lyon. Claudette Fournier hurried through the alley, her shoes clicking against the cobblestones as she clutched a satchel of contraband newspapers to her chest. The Resistance printing press had worked through the night, and now dawn threatened to expose her mission. The night air carried the lingering scent of smoke from the bombing 2 days prior. Buildings once vibrant with life stood like hollow skeletons against the indigo sky. 3 years into the occupation, and still Claudette felt her heart race at every German patrol. Papers solved nothing, her father had told her before his arrest. They only get good people killed. But she believed differently. Information was the only weapon many French citizens had left. The truth was worth dying for, perhaps the only thing worth dying for in this war that had swallowed everything else. Rounding the corner, Claudette froze at the sound of boots against stone. A German patrol. She pressed herself against a wall, holding her breath as a searchlight swept the adjacent street. The beam caught her shadow for just a moment before she could fully conceal herself. "Halt! Identify yourself!" The command came in accented French. Claudette's fingers instinctively reached for the small pistol hidden in her coat pocket. Better to die fighting than face interrogation. The Resistance had taught her that much. The officer approached alone, his subordinates hanging back at the street corner. In the dim light, she could see he was tall, his officer's cap casting shadows across his face. "Mademoiselle, it is past curfew," he said, his voice unexpectedly quiet. "Your papers, please." Her forged identification was excellent, the Resistance had perfected their craft, but the newspapers would condemn her instantly. Claudette forced a smile, letting her satchel slide behind her. "Officer, forgive me. I'm returning from tending my sick aunt." The lie came easily to her lips. After 3 years of occupation, deception had become second nature. The officer stepped closer, his flashlight illuminating her face. He was younger than most commanding officers she'd encountered, perhaps 30, with eyes that looked tired rather than cruel. "Your papers," he repeated, though without the usual harshness. As she fumbled with her identification, the satchel slipped, spilling several newspapers onto the cobblestones between them. The bold headline shouted up at them both, "Resistance strikes in Marseille." For one terrible moment, time suspended. The officer looked down at the incriminating evidence, then back to her face. Claudette's hand moved to her pocket, fingers closing around her pistol. "Pick those up," he said, his voice measured. "Quickly." Confused, she hesitated. "Now," he urged quietly, glancing back at his men who remained at a distance. "Before they see." With trembling hands, Claudette gathered the newspapers, stuffing them back into her satchel. The officer examined her identity card with exaggerated thoroughness. "Claudette Fournier," he read aloud. "Your aunt lives in this district?" "Yes, on Rue Saint-Jean," she answered, heart pounding. He handed back her papers. "My men and I will escort you home, Mademoiselle Fournier. This is no time for a woman to be alone on the streets." The way he emphasized her name carried a warning she understood instantly. He was letting her go, but he knew exactly what she was carrying. "That won't be necessary, officer." "Major Eric Keller," he replied. Then, barely audibly, "Take the next right and go through the bakery. The patrol doesn't cover that section for another 20 minutes. Claudette stared at him, unable to mask her shock. A German officer helping a resistance courier? It was unthinkable. Why? The question escaped her lips before she could stop it. His eyes met hers briefly. "Because not all of us are the monsters you believe us to be. Now go, before I reconsider." This moment, this inexplicable act of mercy from a man who should be her enemy, would later mark the beginning of everything that followed. As Claudette slipped away into the shadows, taking the route he'd suggested, she found herself troubled by the most dangerous thought a resistance fighter could have, that perhaps her enemy had a face, and eyes that held something other than hatred. For 3 years, she had lived by a single conviction: a good French citizen could never see the humanity in the occupiers. To do so was to betray every life lost, every freedom stolen. Love, compassion, understanding, these were luxuries for peacetime, not for a world torn apart by war. Yet as dawn broke over Lyon, Claudette found herself looking back, the image of Major Keller's tired eyes lingering in her mind like a question she was afraid to answer. 2 weeks passed before Claudette saw him again. The resistance cell had been busy: railway sabotage, intelligence gathering, helping downed Allied pilots escape to Spain. Each night she returned to her small apartment above the bookshop her parents had owned before the war. Each morning she awoke expecting arrest. The German officer who had let her go remained a troubling puzzle. Then came the raid on the café. It was meant to be a simple meeting, 3 resistance members exchanging information, but someone had talked. German soldiers surrounded the building, arresting everyone inside. Claudette had arrived late, witnessing the scene from across the street. Among the officers directing the operation stood Major Keller. Their eyes met across the chaos. For a moment, she thought he might alert his men to her presence. Instead, he deliberately looked away, focusing his attention elsewhere as she retreated into an alleyway. That evening, a knock came at her apartment door. Claudette grabbed her pistol before answering, prepared for the worst. But when she opened the door, Major Keller stood alone, in civilian clothes. "May I come in?" he asked quietly. "I believe we have matters to discuss." "You've come to arrest me," she said, keeping her weapon visible. He shook his head. "If that were my intention, I would have brought soldiers." Against all reason, she let him enter. "You're taking an extraordinary risk, Major," Claudette said, keeping distance between them. "What do you want?" "To warn you," he replied, remaining near the door. "The man you were meeting today, Marcel, has been compromised. The Gestapo have him now." Cold fear gripped her. "How do you know his name? How did you find me?" "I followed you that night, after our encounter. I wanted to be certain you weren't important." His words carried a weight she understood instantly. Important enough to arrest. Important enough to interrogate. "And now you know I am." Eric removed his hat, revealing disheveled blonde hair. Up close, without his uniform, he seemed less imposing, more human. "I didn't come here to threaten you, Mademoiselle Fournier. I came because Marcel gave them 3 names before." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "Yours was one of them." Claudette's hand tightened around her pistol. Why would a German officer warn a resistance fighter? "What game are you playing?" "Not all Germans believe in Hitler's war," he said simply. "Some of us were forced into uniform. Yet you follow orders. You arrest my countrymen. I do what I must to survive, as do you." He moved toward the window, careful to stay away from the light. "I was a professor before the war. Literature. Not a soldier. And that absolves you." "Nothing absolves any of us." His voice carried a heaviness that surprised her. "But perhaps we can save lives where possible." Against her better judgment, against everything she believed, Claudette found herself wanting to understand him. It was dangerous, more dangerous than any resistance mission. "You should leave Paris," he continued. "Tonight if possible. I can't abandon my cell. They'll be looking for you by morning." Their conversation was interrupted by air raid sirens. The distant rumble of Allied bombers approached, and soon the anti-aircraft guns began their thunderous reply. "You should go," Claudette said, moving toward the blackout curtains. Instead, Eric helped her secure the windows. As the bombs began falling across the city, they found themselves crouched together in the small hallway, away from glass and exterior walls. The building shook with each explosion, dust filtering down from the ceiling. "This is how the world ends," she whispered. "Not with mercy, but with fire from the heavens." "The world isn't ending," Eric replied. "It's changing. There's a difference." When their hands accidentally touched in the darkness, neither pulled away immediately. It was the first gentle human contact Claudette had experienced in years, and its unexpectedness made it somehow more poignant. "Why did you really come here tonight?" she asked. In the darkness, she couldn't see his expression, only feel his presence beside her. "Because when I saw you that night with the newspapers, I recognized something in you that I thought had died in this war," he answered. "Conviction. Purpose. I needed to see it again." The bombing continued for hours, keeping them trapped in that hallway, talking in whispers about the world before war, about books they had read, about the simple pleasures of peacetime. Never about military matters, never about the resistance, as if by mutual agreement, they had created a temporary sanctuary from the conflict that defined their lives. When dawn came and the all-clear sounded, Eric rose to leave. "If you won't leave Paris, be careful," he said, returning to his formal demeanor. "Change your meeting places. Trust no one for the next few weeks." At the door, he hesitated. "I shouldn't see you again." "No," Claudette agreed. "You shouldn't." Yet 3 days later, she found a note slipped under her door with an address and a time. Everything within her training, everything she believed, told her it was a trap. Yet she went anyway, taking every precaution, watching for tails, carrying her pistol. The address led to an abandoned greenhouse on the outskirts of the city, its glass panes mostly shattered, wild roses growing unchecked among the ruins. Eric waited inside, again in civilian clothes, looking as uncertain as she felt. "I told myself I was coming to give you information," he said when she approached. "Intelligence that might help your people survive." "Is that true?" "Partly." He handed her a folded paper with troop movements and checkpoint changes. "But I also wanted to see you again." "Which makes me either a traitor or a fool." "Perhaps both," Claudette said, though without malice. "As am I, for coming here." That meeting became the first of many. Always in different locations, always under the pretense of exchanging information, which they did. Eric passed her German patrol schedules, warnings about planned raids. Claudette provided nothing that would endanger her network but shared enough to maintain the facade that these were strategic encounters. Both knew they were lying to themselves. Between the exchange of military information came conversations about poetry, about childhood memories, about hopes for peace. In those stolen moments, the war receded, and they were simply a man and a woman finding unexpected connection. "My father was imprisoned for opposing the Nazi Party," Eric told her during one such meeting in an abandoned chapel. "He died in Dachau 2 years ago. My mother and sister live in Berlin, under constant surveillance. I joined the army because the alternative was joining them in the camps." "You could have deserted," Claudette challenged, though her tone had lost its edge. "To what end? To be shot as a deserter? To have my family punished?" He shook his head. "I chose to work within, to mitigate where I could. Small mercies in an unmerciful time." "And is this a small mercy too?" she asked, gesturing to the space between them. "These meetings?" Eric's expression softened. "No. This is my salvation." The words hung between them, dangerous and true. When he reached for her hand, Claudette didn't pull away. Their fingers intertwined, a bridge across an impossible divide. "In another life," she whispered. "Perhaps in this one," he replied. Their first kiss came during an air raid, sheltering in the cellar of a bombed-out building, the world exploding around them as their carefully maintained barriers finally crumbled. It was tender and desperate at once, a defiance against the war that demanded they hate each other. Afterward, Claudette pressed her forehead against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "This can only end in tragedy." "Most things do, in war," Eric said, stroking her hair. "But perhaps that makes them more precious, not less." Summer turned to autumn, and their dangerous liaison continued. Each meeting was arranged through coded messages left at dead drops. Each parting carried the weight of possible finality. They created a fragile sanctuary amid destruction, knowing discovery would mean death for both. Then came the day that shattered everything. Claudette arrived at their meeting place, an abandoned apartment overlooking the Seine, to find it surrounded by German patrol cars. Watching from a distance, she saw Eric being escorted out in handcuffs, his face bloodied. Following him came Philippe, one of her resistance comrades, also in custody. Her blood turned cold. Had Eric betrayed them after all? Had this entire relationship been an elaborate trap? She retreated to an emergency safe house, mind racing through possibilities. If Eric had turned traitor, the entire network was compromised. Yet something didn't fit. Why would he be arrested alongside Philippe? 2 agonizing days passed before word reached her through resistance channels. Philippe had been captured during a separate operation and had revealed under torture that a German officer was passing information to the resistance. He hadn't known Eric's name, but he'd known about the meeting location. Eric hadn't betrayed them. He had been discovered. The news that followed was worse. Eric was being held at Gestapo headquarters, accused of treason. Execution was certain. For the first time since joining the resistance, Claudette found herself torn between duty and heart. To attempt to rescue would risk everything, her life, her comrades, the network they had built over years of occupation. The rational choice was clear: cut losses, move operations, continue the fight. But as she sat alone in the safe house, Claudette realized the war had already taken everything from her, her parents, her home, her future. Eric had given her back something she thought lost forever, the capacity to see beyond hatred, to find humanity even in an enemy uniform. "This is madness," Jack, her cell leader, told her when she proposed the rescue. "You're asking us to risk everything for a German." "For a man who has saved dozens of our people with his information," she countered. "For someone who chose to help us at the cost of his life." "Because he fell in love with you," Jack said bluntly. "Not for France." Does motivation matter when the result is the same? She looked around at her comrades. How many of us would be dead without his warnings? How many operations succeeded because of his intelligence? In the end, 3 agreed to help her, not for Eric, but for Claudette, who had never asked anything for herself in all her years of resistance work. The plan was simple and desperate: create a diversion outside Gestapo headquarters, use stolen uniforms to enter during the chaos, and extract Eric before reinforcements arrived. Success was unlikely. Death was probable. Yet as they prepared, Claudette felt an odd calm. For the first time since the occupation began, she was fighting not just against something, but for someone. The night of the rescue brought pouring rain, a blessing that reduced visibility and dampened sound. The diversionary explosion at a nearby power station plunged the district into darkness. Claudette and Jacques entered the building in German uniforms while the others maintained a covered escape route. What they found inside would haunt Claudette forever. Eric had been interrogated extensively. When they found him in a basement cell, he was barely conscious, his body bearing the unmistakable marks of torture. Yet his eyes focused when he saw her. "You shouldn't have come," he whispered as they cut his bonds. "I couldn't leave you here," she replied, supporting his weight as they moved toward the door. "They know about you," he warned. "I didn't tell them, but they suspect." The escape was chaotic, gunfire in corridors, alarms blaring, Jack providing covering fire as Claudette helped Eric through the rain-slicked streets to a waiting vehicle. By morning, they had reached a resistance safe house outside the city, but Eric's condition was deteriorating rapidly. "You need a doctor," Claudette insisted, cleaning his wounds as best she could. "What I need is for you to leave France," Eric replied, his breathing labored. "They'll never stop looking for you now." The resistance doctor who arrived confirmed her fears: internal bleeding, broken ribs, pneumonia setting in. Without proper medical care, Eric's chances were slim. "There's a surgeon in Switzerland," the doctor told her privately. "If you could get him across the border." The Swiss border was heavily guarded, the mountain passes treacherous, and winter approaching. But Switzerland meant neutrality, safety, and proper medical care. It became their only hope. Jack arranged for false papers and a resistance guide familiar with the Alpine crossings. The journey would take them through German checkpoints, across minefields, and over freezing mountain passes. "This isn't just about us anymore," Eric told her the night before their departure. His fever had broken temporarily, leaving him lucid. "If I'm captured again, I won't survive another interrogation. The information I have would destroy the entire network." "Then we won't be captured," Claudette said with a determination she didn't entirely feel. She sat beside him on the narrow bed, their fingers intertwined. "When this is over, when the war ends." "When the war ends," he continued for her, "I will find you. Whatever happens, however long it takes." They left before dawn, traveling in a delivery truck with Eric hidden beneath crates of vegetables. At each checkpoint, Claudette's forged papers identifying her as a farmer's wife held up to scrutiny. Eric remained silent despite his pain, understanding that a single sound could condemn them both. The truck took them as far as the mountain foothills. From there, they continued on foot, guided by Marcel, a weathered resistance fighter who knew every hidden path. The mountains in November were already snow-covered, the passes treacherous. Eric struggled to keep pace, each step clearly agonizing with his injuries. On the second night, his fever returned with frightening intensity. "Leave me," he urged when they stopped to rest in an abandoned shepherd's hut. "I'm slowing you down." "I didn't come this far to lose you now," Claudette replied, using snow to cool his forehead. "We rest tonight. Tomorrow we continue." But dawn brought a new threat, a German patrol spotted in the valley below, clearly searching the area with dogs. "They're tracking us," Marcel confirmed grimly. "We need to split up. I'll lead them away while you two continue to the ridge. There's a marker there of 3 stacked stones. Follow the path beyond it east, and you'll reach the border by nightfall." "It's suicide," Claudette protested. "This whole war is suicide," Marcel replied with a sad smile. "But some things are worth dying for." He looked between them. "What you two have, it matters. It shows that even in this hell, humanity can still triumph. Remember that." Before they could argue further, Marcel was gone, deliberately leaving tracks in the snow leading away from their intended route. Claudette helped Eric to his feet, and together they continued upward, the sound of distant gunfire confirming Marcel's sacrifice. The climb was brutal, the wind cutting through their inadequate clothing, but the thought of Switzerland, of safety, drove them forward. By late afternoon, they reached the ridge Marcel had described, finding the marker stones half buried in fresh snow. Beyond lay a steep descent into a valley. "That's Switzerland," Claudette said, pointing to lights twinkling in the distance. "Just a few more hours." Eric nodded, too exhausted for words. His face was grey with fatigue, his lips blue with cold. They began the descent as darkness fell, picking their way carefully down the treacherous slope. The border itself was unmarked in this remote area, but Marcel had told them of a small alpine village just inside Swiss territory where they could find help. The sound of dogs barking echoed up from the valley. "Another patrol," Claudette whispered, pulling Eric behind an outcropping of rocks. "They must have found Marcel, learned our destination." Eric's condition had worsened dramatically during the descent. His breathing was shallow, his skin burning despite the cold. "You need to go ahead," he said, his voice barely audible. "Get to Switzerland." "I'll delay them." "No," she said fiercely. "We're almost there. Together." With renewed determination, she helped him to his feet, and they continued downward, using trees and rocks for cover. The lights of the Swiss village grew closer, a beacon of hope in the darkness. When they reached the valley floor, Eric collapsed. No amount of encouragement could get him back on his feet. The sound of the patrol dogs grew louder. "Go," he insisted. "Please." Instead, Claudette helped him into a hollow beneath a fallen tree, covering him with branches and her own coat. "I'll draw them away, then circle back." "Claudette," Eric caught her hand weakly. "If we don't." She silenced him with a kiss. "We will. I promise." Taking Eric's pistol, Claudette moved away from their hiding place, deliberately making tracks in the snow leading away from the Swiss border, back toward France. When she heard the patrol approaching, she fired 2 shots into the air, then ran. The patrol dogs picked up her trail instantly. She led them on a desperate chase through the trees, gradually circling around toward the border while staying ahead of their searchlights. A bullet grazed her arm, but adrenaline dulled the pain. All that mattered was leading them away from Eric. When she could run no further, Claudette found herself at the edge of a frozen stream. Across it lay Switzerland, safety, but returning to Eric would mean crossing the patrol's path. The choice was impossible, her survival or his. In that moment, everything became clear. The war had taught her that survival alone was not enough. What mattered was what you survived for. Doubling back through the trees, Claudette managed to evade the searching patrol, now focused on the false trail she'd created leading away from the border. She returned to find Eric unconscious but alive beneath the fallen tree. With the last of her strength, she half carried, half dragged him toward the Swiss village, whose lights seemed simultaneously so close and impossibly distant. Each step was a battle against exhaustion and cold. Dawn was breaking when they finally stumbled into the village. The last thing Claudette remembered was the face of an elderly Swiss woman opening her door, her expression changing from suspicion to concern as she saw their condition. Claudette awoke 3 days later in a small clinic. Her first conscious thought was of Eric. "The German?" she asked the nurse who came to check on her. "The man who was with me." The nurse's expression softened. "He's alive, but very weak. The doctor operated yesterday to stop the internal bleeding. It will be some time before he can travel. But he'll recover. With proper care and rest, yes." Relief washed over Claudette like a physical force. They had made it. Whatever came next, they had reached safety together. Recovery was slow for both of them. The Swiss authorities were initially suspicious of a French woman and a German officer seeking asylum together, but the local doctor vouched for their condition, buying them time. Eventually, the International Red Cross verified their identities, and with Switzerland's neutrality policy, they were permitted to stay under careful monitoring. Eric's recovery took months. Claudette remained by his side, reading to him from books borrowed from the village library, watching color slowly return to his face. By spring, he could walk short distances, leaning on her arm as they ventured outside to feel the alpine sun on their faces. "What happens when the war ends?" she asked one afternoon as they sat beside a mountain stream. "Germany will lose," Eric said with certainty. "And then?" "And then?" He took her hand, his fingers tracing the lines of her palm. "And then we begin again. Not as enemies, not as German and French, but simply as Eric and Claudette." News of the war reached them in fragments: the Allied invasion of Normandy, the liberation of Paris, the push into Germany itself. From their sanctuary in the Swiss Alps, it seemed almost unreal, like a storm passing in the distance. When victory in Europe was finally announced in May 1945, the village celebrated with wine and music in the square. Claudette and Eric watched from the window of their small rented room. "It's over," she whispered. "Finally over." Eric pulled her close. "No," he said softly. "For us, it's just beginning." In the autumn of 1945, they married in the village church, with the doctor who had saved Eric's life and the elderly woman who had first taken them in as their only guests. The following spring, they crossed into France legally, with proper papers and Eric's status as a documented anti-Nazi German securing him safe passage. They settled in a small town in Provence, far from the painful memories of Paris. Eric found work teaching at a local school, while Claudette opened a bookshop similar to the one her parents had owned. Years later, when their children asked how they had met, they would exchange a look that contained all they could not say: the fear, the danger, the impossible choices of wartime. Then Eric would smile and tell them simply, "Your mother saved my life in more ways than one." And Claudette would add, "We found each other when the world wanted us to be enemies." Remember that, there is always humanity to be found, even in the darkest times. In the garden of their small stone house, roses grew wild and untamed, reminiscent of the abandoned greenhouse where they had first acknowledged what was growing between them. Each bloom a testament to what can flourish, against all odds, when love proves stronger than hate.